the diamond-studded watch on Victoria. Chen's wrist cost more than most people earned in a year, but she couldn't stop checking it. 3 minutes past 7. The gala was in 2 hours, and her assistant had somehow failed to arrange her private car service. Victoria stood in the marble lobby of Chen Technologies, her company's headquarters, fury radiating from her like heat waves. 42 years old, self-made billionaire, Forbes cover twice over, and she was stuck waiting like some common employee because of incompetence she simply would not tolerate. "Miss Chen?" A tentative voice interrupted her spiral of anger. She whipped around to find Robert Martinez, the evening janitor, holding his mop with the kind of gentle dignity that somehow made her even angrier. He was in his late 60s, with silver hair and eyes that crinkled at the corners. The face of someone who smiled too much for someone pushing a mop at 70. "What?" Victoria snapped. "I couldn't help but notice you seemed troubled. Is there anything I can—" "Unless you can magically produce my car service, no." She turned away, already pulling out her phone to fire her assistant via text. "You know what my abuela used to tell me?" Robert continued, undeterred by her dismissal. "She'd say, 'Mijo, the kindness you give always finds its way back to you. Sometimes when you need it most.'" Victoria's fingers froze over her phone. Slowly, she turned to face him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and disdain. "Did you seriously just interrupt me to share your grandmother's fortune cookie wisdom?" Robert's smile didn't falter. "I know it sounds simple. Simple? It's simple-minded." Victoria's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Let me tell you something about the real world, Robert. Kindness doesn't close deals. It doesn't build empires. It doesn't turn a garage startup into a $20 billion company." She stepped closer, her designer heels clicking against the marble. "That quote? That's the kind of thing poor people tell themselves to feel better about being poor. It's a participation trophy for life's losers." The words hung in the air between them like poison. Robert's smile faded, but his eyes held something Victoria couldn't quite name. Not anger, but something deeper. Sadness, maybe, or pity. "I'm sorry you see it that way, Miss Chen," he said quietly, then returned to his mopping. Victoria felt a brief flicker of something. Guilt? Perhaps, but she crushed it immediately. She didn't have time for feelings. She had a gala to get to, a merger to finalize, an empire to run. She stormed toward the parking garage, deciding she'd drive herself in her backup car. The next few weeks blurred together in Victoria's typical hurricane of meetings, acquisitions, and strategic warfare disguised as business. She forgot about Robert and his ridiculous quote entirely until the day everything fell apart. It started with a headache during a board meeting. Then came the dizziness. Victoria prided herself on never showing weakness, so she pushed through, even as the conference room started to tilt. She was signing a contract worth $800 million when her hand began to shake so violently she couldn't hold the pen. "Miss Chen?" Her CFO stood up, alarmed. "I'm fine," she insisted, but the words came out slurred. She wasn't fine. The left side of her face felt numb. Her arm wouldn't respond to her commands. Somewhere in the back of her brilliant, calculating mind, she recognized these symptoms, stroke, but accepting it felt like admitting defeat. Victoria tried to stand, to show them all she was still in control, but her legs buckled. The last thing she remembered before hitting the floor was the horrifying realization that she was completely helpless. She woke up in a hospital bed, tubes running from her arms, monitors beeping steadily beside her. A neurologist explained in careful, sympathetic tones that she'd had a major ischemic stroke. The blood clot had been caught in time, but she'd need months of rehabilitation. Her speech would recover, probably. Her motor functions would improve, maybe. Her ability to run her company. "Let's focus on getting you walking first," the doctor said gently. Victoria had built her entire identity on being unstoppable, and now she couldn't even hold a glass of water without her hand trembling. The board voted to install an interim CEO temporarily. Her rivals circled like sharks. Articles appeared with headlines like, "The Fall of Victoria Chen," and "Tech Titan's Empire Crumbles." But the worst part was the loneliness. Victoria had spent 20 years building her company, and 0 years building relationships. No family, her parents were gone, and she'd never had time for siblings or children. No real friends, Just business associates who disappeared the moment she couldn't be useful to them. Her hospital room filled with expensive flower arrangements from people who hoped she'd never come back. After 2 weeks, they transferred her to a rehabilitation facility. Victoria wheeled herself into the common area for her first physical therapy session, hating every second of her weakness, when she heard a familiar voice. "Miss Chen? Is that you?" Robert Martinez stood in the doorway, wearing volunteer badge and carrying a stack of books. For a moment, Victoria wanted to wheel herself right back out. She couldn't bear for him to see her like this, broken, helpless, everything she'd mocked him for being in her mind. But her treacherous wheelchair wouldn't cooperate with her trembling hands. Robert approached slowly, his face radiating genuine concern. "I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry. I volunteer here twice a week, reading to patients." He paused. "Would you like some company?" Victoria meant to say no. She meant to maintain the walls she'd built so carefully. Instead, she heard herself whisper, "I can't even read. The words, they swim." "Then I'll read to you," Robert said simply, pulling up a chair. Over the following weeks, something unexpected happened. Robert came every Tuesday and Thursday without fail. He read her everything from business journals to mystery novels. He helped wheel her to therapy when the nurses were busy. He brought her real coffee when she was sick of hospital brew, never mentioning that it probably cost him a significant chunk of his modest paycheck. One evening, as purple twilight painted the windows, Victoria asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why are you being so kind to me? After what I said to you?" Robert set down the book he'd been reading. "You want the truth?" She nodded. "Because my abuela was right. Kindness finds its way back when you need it most. But not to you. Miss Chen, to me." He smiled softly. "See my granddaughter Sophia? She has the same kind of drive you have. Brilliant, ambitious, determined to change the world. She's applying to colleges now, wants to study engineering." "That's good," Victoria said, confused. "It is, but I worry sometimes that she's becoming hard like you were. All ambition, no compassion. So focused on winning that she forgets about being human." Robert leaned forward. "Helping you reminds me that even the hardest hearts can soften, that it's never too late to remember what matters. And maybe, just maybe, if I can show Sophia that kindness is strength, not weakness, she'll build her empire differently than you built yours." Tears stung Victoria's eyes, the first she'd cried since the stroke. "I built it wrong, didn't I?" "You built it incomplete," Robert corrected gently. "But buildings can always be renovated." The months of recovery were brutal. Victoria relearned how to walk without a cane, how to write without her hand shaking, how to speak without slurring. But more than that, she relearned how to be human. Robert introduced her to other volunteers and patients. She heard their stories. The single mother fighting cancer between double shifts, the veteran learning to navigate life with PTSD, the teenager paralyzed in an accident who somehow still smiled. These people had every reason to be bitter, and yet they chose kindness daily. One Tuesday, Robert brought Sophia to meet her. The young woman was indeed brilliant, firing off questions about Victoria's company, her strategy, her vision. Victoria saw herself in that hungry ambition, and she saw the hardness already forming around the girl's heart. "Sophia," Victoria said carefully, "can I tell you the most important business lesson I ever learned?" The girl leaned forward eagerly. "Your grandfather's quote about kindness finding its way back, I mocked him for it. Called it fortune cookie wisdom." Victoria's voice strengthened. "But it's the truest thing anyone ever told me. I built a $20 billion empire and ended up alone in a hospital room with flowers from people who hated me. That's not success. That's failure dressed in expensive clothes." Sophia glanced at her grandfather, then back at Victoria. "But you're still brilliant. You still achieved incredible things." "I achieved half things," Victoria corrected. "I'm spending the second half of my life trying to make them whole." 6 months after her stroke, Victoria returned to Chen Technologies, not as CEO, but as executive advisor. She'd spent her recovery developing something new, a foundation that would provide scholarships, mentorship, and startup funding for people like Robert's granddaughter, people with brilliance but without privilege. Her first call was to Robert, offering him a position as head of community outreach, salary 10 times his janitor pay. He cried on the phone. So did she. The gala she'd been rushing to the night everything changed, They held it anyway, a year late. Victoria stood at the podium, her speech occasionally halting, but her message crystal clear. A wise woman once told me that kindness finds its way back when you need it most. She began, meeting Robert's eyes in the crowd. I was too arrogant to listen. It took losing everything to realize. I'd never had anything at all, nothing that mattered anyway. She paused, letting the words settle. We measure success in all the wrong ways. Stock prices, market share, net worth. But the only metric that matters is this. Who will sit with you when you're broken? Who will show you kindness when you have nothing to offer in return? Her voice grew stronger. I built an empire on ruthlessness and died alone on a conference room floor. Robert Martinez, a janitor making minimum wage, rebuilt my humanity with simple acts of grace. Tell me, which of us was really rich? The audience sat in stunned silence. Then Sophia started clapping, and the sound spread like wildfire. After the gala, Victoria found Robert on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. Your abuela would be proud, she said softly. She'd say she told me so, Robert chuckled. Then, more seriously, thank you, Miss Chen, for giving Sophia a chance. For giving a lot of kids a chance. Call me Victoria, and thank you for giving me one when I didn't deserve it. She stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder. That quote? It saved my life, Robert. Not from the stroke, but from what came after. From dying alone, bitter and forgotten. Kindness finding its way back, Robert murmured. It found its way back, Victoria agreed. And now I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure it keeps moving forward. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city below, a janitor and a billionaire, both infinitely richer than they'd been before.